The morning rain had just stopped when David pulled into the parking lot of TechFlow Solutions. He turned off his old Honda and sat for a moment, checking his phone one last time. Today was the day everything would change, though nobody inside. That gleaming office building knew it yet. David stepped out of his car and grabbed his worn leather bag from the back seat. At 38, he had learned that first impressions could be deceiving. He wore his favorite jeans and a simple blue polo shirt. His sneakers squeaked slightly on the wet pavement as he walked toward the main entrance. To anyone watching, he looked like he might be there to fix a computer or deliver office supplies. The lobby of TechFlow Solutions was all glass and chrome, the kind of place designed to impress visitors and make employees feel important. David approached the reception desk where a young woman was typing frantically on her keyboard, her phone headset blinking with incoming calls. "Excuse me," David said politely, waiting for her to finish her call. The receptionist looked up and gave him a quick once-over. She took in his casual clothes and the scuffed laptop bag slung over his shoulder. "Are you here for a delivery?" she asked, barely pausing her typing. "Actually, I have a meeting scheduled with the executive team," David replied with a patient smile. She frowned and checked her computer screen. "What company are you with?" "I'm David Chen. I should be on the calendar for 10:30. The receptionist scrolled through her appointments, looking confused. "I don't see anything here." "Are you sure you have the right building?" "Sometimes delivery. People get confused about which entrance to use." David remained calm. This wasn't the first time someone had made assumptions about him based on his appearance. "I'm not making a delivery. I'm here for a business meeting. Could you please check with someone upstairs?" Before the receptionist could respond, the elevator doors opened and several people in suits emerged, heading for the coffee station near the lobby. Among them was Robert Mitchell, a senior software engineer who had been with TechFlow for 8 years. Robert was known throughout the company for his technical brilliance, but also for his sharp tongue and impatience with people he considered beneath him. Robert noticed David standing at the reception desk and immediately assumed the worst. In his mind, the company had been going downhill lately. Too many meetings, too many consultants, too many people who didn't understand real technology work. And now here was another one, probably some vendor trying to sell them something they didn't need. "Is there a problem here?" Robert asked, approaching the desk with his coffee in hand. The receptionist looked relieved to have backup. "This gentleman says he has a meeting with the executives, but I can't find anything on the schedule." Robert looked David up and down, taking in the casual clothes and worn bag. "Look, buddy," he said with barely concealed irritation. "I don't know what you're trying to sell us, but we're not interested. Vendors and service people need to use the delivery entrance around back. This lobby is for actual business meetings." David felt the familiar sting of being judged before anyone knew who he was or what he was capable of. But he had learned long ago that getting angry only made situations worse. "I understand there might be some confusion," he said calmly, "but I'm actually here for a meeting about the company's future direction." Robert let out a short laugh. "The company's future direction, right. Let me guess, you're here to sell us some new software or maybe talk about our office supplies contract." "No, actually Listen," Robert interrupted, his voice getting louder. "I've been working here for 8 years. I know how this place runs. We don't need whatever you're selling, and we definitely don't need random people wandering around the executive floor thinking they belong in boardrooms." A few other employees had started to notice the commotion. Some gathered near the coffee station, pretending to be busy while they listened. Others walked by slowly, clearly uncomfortable with what they were hearing, but unsure whether to intervene. David glanced around at the growing audience. He could see some people looking embarrassed by Robert's behavior, but nobody stepped forward to help. This was exactly the kind of situation he hoped to address once he took over the company. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," David said, keeping his voice level despite Robert's increasingly aggressive tone. "The only misunderstanding here is you thinking you can just walk into our building and demand meetings with executives." Robert shot back. "Do you have any idea how important the people in this company are? We work on cutting-edge technology here. This isn't some mom-and-pop shop where anyone can just walk in off the street." The receptionist was now looking very uncomfortable, glancing between David and Robert like she wanted to disappear. A few more employees had gathered, drawn by Robert's raised voice. Some looked concerned, others seemed curious about the drama unfolding in their usually quiet lobby. David remained patient, though inside he was taking mental notes about the company culture he was about to inherit. "I understand you're protective of your workplace," he said. "That's actually admirable, but I really do have a legitimate meeting scheduled." "Legitimate?" Robert scoffed. "Look at yourself, man. You walk in here dressed like you're going to fix someone's lawnmower, and you expect us to believe you have business with our CEO? Come on." The comment stung more than David let on. Throughout his career, he had faced similar assumptions. People saw his casual dress, his young face, or sometimes just his ethnicity, and decided he didn't belong in certain rooms or conversations. He had learned to use these low expectations to his advantage in business negotiations, but it never stopped hurting on a personal level. "I prefer to dress comfortably," David replied simply. "Well, your comfort isn't our problem," Robert continued, now playing to his audience of coworkers. "This is a professional environment. We have standards here. We can't just let anyone wander around disrupting our work because they think they deserve a meeting with the boss." The conversation was attracting more attention now. Word was spreading through the office that there was some kind of confrontation happening in the lobby. People were finding excuses to walk by, and a small crowd had formed near the elevator bank. David checked his watch. It was almost 10:30, and his meeting with the executive team would be starting soon. He needed to get upstairs, but Robert seemed determined to block his path. "Look," David said, making one more attempt at diplomacy, "I can see we're both concerned about this company's best interests. Why don't we just call upstairs and clear this up?" Robert crossed his arms and shook his head. "I'm not calling anyone. You can turn around and walk back out that door, or I can call security. Your choice." The lobby had grown quiet except for Robert's voice, which was now loud enough for everyone to hear clearly. David could see people filming with their phones, and he knew this situation was spiraling out of control. In just a few minutes, he would walk into that conference room and take control of the entire company. But first, he had to deal with Robert Mitchell and the assumptions that were about to cost him everything. David could feel the weight of every pair of eyes in the lobby watching him. The situation was getting worse by the minute, and Robert seemed to be enjoying the attention. What had started as a simple misunderstanding was now turning into a public spectacle. "You know what your problem is?" Robert continued, his voice carrying across the marble floor of the lobby. "You people think you can just show up anywhere and demand respect without earning it. This is a tech company. We built this place with our skills and hard work." The words hit David like a punch to the gut. "You people." He had heard those words before, usually right before someone said something they would later claim wasn't really about race. David's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to stay calm. Losing his temper now would only make things worse. "I'm not demanding anything," David said quietly. "I'm simply trying to get to my scheduled meeting." "Scheduled meeting," Robert repeated with a bitter laugh. "Right. And I suppose you're going to tell us you're some kind of big-shot executive too? Maybe a consultant who's going to teach us how to run our own business." A woman from the accounting department had joined the growing crowd of onlookers. She looked uncomfortable and whispered something to her colleague, but neither of them spoke up. David noticed how quickly people were pulling out their phones. In today's world, every confrontation became a potential viral video. Robert was clearly feeding off the attention now. "Let me tell you something, friend. I've seen dozens of people like you come through here over the years. Consultants, vendors, salespeople. They all think they know better than the people who actually do the work. But this company succeeds because of people like me. People who understand technology. People who've earned their place here." David felt his patience wearing thin, but he knew that reacting with anger would only prove Robert's point in the minds of some observers. "I respect the work that everyone here does," he said. "Technology companies need talented engineers." "Oh, you respect our work?" Robert's voice dripped with sarcasm. "How generous of you. And what exactly qualifies you to judge our work? What's your background? Let me guess, you took some business classes and now you think you understand how a real company operates." The crowd was getting larger now. David could see people peeking around corners and standing in doorways. Some looked embarrassed by what they were witnessing, but others seemed curious to see how far Robert would take things. A few employees were clearly recording everything on their phones. "My background isn't really the issue here," David replied, still trying to keep things from escalating further. "Oh, but I think it is," Robert shot back. "You see, this company has been built by people with real qualifications, people with engineering degrees from top universities, people who've spent years learning their craft. We don't just hand out important meetings to anyone who walks in off the street." David could hear the subtle implications in Robert's words, the suggestion that he couldn't possibly have the right qualifications or background, the assumption that someone who looked like him, dressed like him, couldn't belong in the same league as the real professionals. "I understand you're protective of your workplace," David said, making one more attempt to diffuse the situation. "That loyalty to your company is admirable." "Don't patronize me," Robert snapped. "This isn't about loyalty. This is about standards. This is about maintaining the quality and professionalism that made this company successful in the first place." The receptionist was now looking desperately around the lobby, clearly hoping someone with more authority would step in and end this confrontation, but the managers and supervisors who might normally intervene seemed to be avoiding the situation entirely. Robert stepped closer to David, his voice getting louder and more aggressive. "You want to know what I think? I think you're probably here because of some diversity program or affirmative action nonsense, some do-gooder initiative that forces us to waste time on meetings with people who don't belong here." The lobby went completely silent. Even the people who had been whispering stopped talking. David felt his heart rate increase, but he forced his expression to remain neutral. He had heard these kinds of comments before, but rarely so publicly and aggressively. "That's quite an assumption," David said softly. "Is it?" Robert pressed on, clearly emboldened by the lack of anyone stopping him. These days, companies are so worried about their image that they'll meet with anyone just to check boxes. It doesn't matter if the person is qualified or if the meeting serves any real purpose, as long as it looks good in some annual report about inclusivity. A young intern near the back of the crowd looked shocked and started to say something, but her supervisor quickly pulled her away from the scene. David noticed how quickly people were looking at their phones or finding reasons to leave when Robert's comments became more obviously problematic. "I'm curious," David said, his voice still calm but with a slight edge that only someone listening carefully would catch. "What exactly do you think qualifies someone to contribute to a tech company's success?" Robert seemed pleased that David was engaging with his argument. "Real skills," he said confidently. "Technical knowledge, a proven track record. The ability to solve complex problems, not just talking points and buzzwords from some management textbook." "And you don't think I might have any of those qualifications?" "Look at yourself," Robert gestured dismissively. "You show up here in jeans and sneakers with a beat-up laptop bag. No appointment that anyone can find? No credentials that you're willing to share? No company ID or business cards? You expect us to believe you belong in a meeting with our executives?" David glanced around at the faces watching them. Some people looked uncomfortable with Robert's increasingly hostile tone, but others seemed to be nodding along with his arguments. He could see how easy it was for people to make assumptions based on surface appearances. "Appearances can be deceiving," David said simply. "Can they?" Robert challenged. "Or maybe they're exactly what they seem to be. Maybe you're just another person trying to talk your way into something you haven't earned. Maybe this whole act is just a way to get your foot in the door so you can waste our executives' time with some sales pitch or consulting proposal." The tension in the lobby was becoming unbearable. David could see employees exchanging glances, some looking like they wanted to intervene but weren't sure how. Others seemed to be enjoying the drama, already thinking about how they would retell this story to their friends. Robert seemed to sense that he had the upper hand and decided to push even further. "You know what really bothers me about people like you? You come in here acting entitled, like the world owes you something, like just showing up should be enough to get you whatever you want. Well, this is the real world, and in the real world, you have to earn your place." David looked at his watch again. The meeting was supposed to start in less than 5 minutes. Soon the conference room doors would open and everything would change. But for now, he was still just a man in jeans being lectured by someone who had no idea who he was talking to. "I suppose we'll see about that," David said quietly, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Robert caught the smile and interpreted it as smugness. "Oh, you think this is funny? You think you can just charm your way past me? Well, let me tell you something, buddy. I've been here for 8 years. I know every important person in this building and none of them are expecting you." As if on cue, David heard the familiar sound of the conference room doors opening on the floor above. The sound of footsteps echoed from the stairwell above, and David could hear voices getting closer. Robert was still talking, completely unaware that his world was about to turn upside down. The crowd in the lobby had grown even larger, with people now openly recording everything on their phones. "Like I said," Robert continued, his voice full of confidence, "none of the important people in this building are expecting some random guy in jeans to show up for a meeting. I guarantee you that when those executives come down here, they're going to want to know why you're disrupting our workplace." David simply nodded and checked his watch one more time. Any second now, everything would change. He could hear the elevator moving and more footsteps on the stairs. The executive team was clearly making their way down to find him. "You're awfully quiet all of a sudden," Robert said with a smug smile. "Finally realizing that you're in over your head? Maybe now you'll admit that this whole thing was just a mistake and you'll head back to wherever you came from." The receptionist was frantically typing on her computer, probably trying to figure out what to do about the situation. She kept glancing toward the elevators, clearly hoping someone in authority would arrive soon and take control of what had become a very awkward situation. "Actually," David said calmly, "I think you're about to meet some of those important people you mentioned." Before Robert could respond, the elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Out stepped Patricia Williams, the CEO of TechFlow Solutions, followed by the entire executive team. There was the Chief Technology Officer, the VP of Operations, the Head of Human Resources, and 3 other senior vice presidents. They were all dressed in business attire and carrying folders and laptops. Patricia looked around the crowded lobby with surprise. She clearly hadn't expected to find half the office staff gathered around the reception desk. Her eyes quickly found David standing in the center of the crowd, still calm despite being surrounded by curious onlookers. "Mr. Chen," Patricia said, warmly, walking directly toward David with a genuine smile. "I'm so sorry we're running a few minutes behind schedule. I hope you haven't been waiting long." The effect on the lobby was immediate and dramatic. The crowd of employees went completely silent, as if someone had suddenly turned off the sound in a movie. Robert's confident smile froze on his face and the color began to drain from his cheeks. David smiled back at Patricia. "No problem at all, Ms. Williams. I've been having an interesting conversation with your staff." Patricia glanced around at the gathered employees, taking in their shocked expressions and the phones that were still recording. She noticed Robert standing closest to David, looking like he had just seen a ghost. "Mr. Chen," Patricia continued, addressing David with obvious respect, "I'd like you to meet our leadership team. Everyone, this is David Chen. And as we discussed in our board meeting last week, his investment group has just completed the acquisition we've been negotiating for the past 3 months." The words hit the lobby like a bomb going off. Several people actually gasped out loud. The receptionist's mouth fell open and she stared at her computer screen as if it might suddenly explain how she had missed something so important. But nobody looked more shocked than Robert. His face went through several different expressions in rapid succession. First confusion, then disbelief, then a growing horror as he began to understand exactly what had just happened. "Mr. Chen is now the majority owner of TechFlow Solutions," Patricia announced to the stunned crowd. "He'll be working closely with our executive team to guide the company's future direction and growth strategy." David could practically hear Robert's brain trying to process this information. The man who had just spent 10 minutes explaining why David didn't belong in the building, why he couldn't possibly have legitimate business there, why he was probably just another unqualified person taking advantage of diversity programs, was now staring at his new boss. "It's a pleasure to meet everyone," David said, addressing the crowd with the same calm tone he had maintained throughout Robert's tirade. "I'm looking forward to working with all of you, and learning more about the incredible work you do here. The VP of Human Resources, Jennifer Walsh, stepped forward and extended her hand to David. "Welcome to the TechFlow family," she said. "We're excited about this new chapter for the company." As David shook hands with each member of the executive team, he could see people in the crowd whispering to each other and pointing at Robert, who was still standing frozen in place. A few employees had started to quietly slip away, probably realizing that they didn't want to be associated with what had just happened. "I should mention," David said, still speaking in his calm, professional voice, "that I had quite an educational experience in your lobby this morning. It gave me some valuable insights into the company culture and how different employees interact with visitors." Patricia's expression grew concerned. "Oh? I hope everyone was welcoming and professional." David glanced at Robert, who was now sweating, visibly and looking like he might be sick. "It was certainly informative," David said diplomatically. "I learned a lot about how some people here view newcomers and what assumptions they make about who belongs in certain conversations." The Chief Technology Officer, Mike Rodriguez, followed David's gaze to Robert and immediately understood that something had gone wrong. "Is there something specific we should know about?" he asked. David considered his options. He could have embarrassed Robert in front of everyone, repeating all the insulting things he had said. He could have demanded immediate consequences or used his new power to humiliate the man who had just humiliated him. But David had learned long ago that how you handle power says more about your character than how you gain it. "Perhaps we could discuss it in our meeting," David suggested. "I think it would be valuable for the leadership team to understand some of the dynamics I observed." Robert finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Mr. Chen, I had no idea. You thought I was what?" David asked gently, not with anger, but with genuine curiosity. Robert opened and closed his mouth several times, clearly struggling to find words that wouldn't make his situation even worse. "I thought you were a vendor or someone trying to sell us something. And that justified treating me the way you did?" David asked. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Robert looked around at his co-workers, many of whom were now staring at him with expressions ranging from embarrassment to disgust. Some people were shaking their heads, clearly disapproving of his behavior. "I was just trying to protect the company," Robert said weakly. "I didn't want anyone disrupting our work." "By making assumptions about someone based on how they were dressed?" David pressed. "By suggesting that I was only here because of affirmative action? By telling me I didn't belong in a professional environment?" Patricia's expression had grown increasingly stern as she listened to this exchange. "Robert," she said sharply, "is this true? Did you really say these things?" Robert looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Several of his co-workers were nodding, confirming that they had witnessed his behavior. A few people were still recording everything on their phones, capturing every moment of his humiliation. There was a misunderstanding," Robert stammered. "I was just trying to maintain our professional standards." "Professional standards?" Jennifer Walsh, the HR director, stepped forward with a look of disbelief. "Robert, what you've described doesn't sound professional at all. It sounds discriminatory and completely inappropriate." David watched as Robert's 8-year career began to crumble around him. The man who had been so confident just minutes earlier now looked small and desperate. But David felt no satisfaction in watching it happen. If anything, he felt sad that someone could let their prejudices destroy their life so completely. The silence in the lobby was deafening. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Robert stood there looking like a man who had just watched his entire life collapse in front of him. His hands were shaking slightly and beads of sweat had formed on his forehead. Patricia looked around at the crowd of employees, then back at David. "Mr. Chen, I think we should move this conversation to somewhere more private. Perhaps my office would be more appropriate." But David raised his hand gently. "Actually, Ms. Williams, I think this situation needs to be addressed right here, right now. What happened in this lobby wasn't private. Everyone saw it, many people recorded it, and it affects the entire workplace culture of this company." He looked around at the faces watching him. Some employees looked ashamed, Others appeared curious about what he would do next. A few seemed genuinely concerned about Robert despite what he had done. "Robert," David said, turning to face the engineer directly. "I want you to understand something. This isn't about revenge or humiliation. This is about accountability and learning. Can you tell everyone here exactly what you said to me over the past 15 minutes? Robert's face went pale. He looked around desperately, as if hoping someone might save him from this moment. But his co-workers just stared back at him, waiting for his response. I made some comments that I shouldn't have," Robert mumbled, looking down at his feet. "What kind of comments?" David pressed gently but firmly. Robert was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "I said you didn't belong here. I made assumptions about why you were here. I suggested that you were only getting meetings because of diversity programs. And," David prompted, "and I told you that vendors and service people should use the back entrance." Robert continued, his voice getting even quieter. "I said this company was built by people with real qualifications." Jennifer Walsh from HR was taking notes on her phone, her expression growing more serious with every word. The other executives were exchanging glances that clearly indicated they had heard enough. "Robert," Patricia said, her voice cold and professional, "in your 8 years with this company, have you ever received training on workplace discrimination and our company policies regarding respectful treatment of all individuals?" "Yes," Robert whispered. "And do you understand that what you did this morning violated multiple company policies, not to mention basic human decency?" Robert nodded without looking up. David stepped forward slightly. "Robert, I want you to look at me." Reluctantly, Robert raised his eyes to meet David's gaze. "I graduated from MIT with degrees in computer science and business administration," David said calmly. "I built my first software company when I was 25 and sold it for $43 million. I started my second company 3 years later and sold that one for over $100 million. I've been investing in tech companies for the past decade, and I've helped create thousands of jobs in this industry." With each word, Robert seemed to shrink a little more. Several employees in the crowd were now shaking their heads in disbelief at how wrong their colleague had been. "But here's the thing," David continued. "None of those achievements should matter when it comes to basic respect. Whether I was a CEO or a janitor, whether I was here for a board meeting or to empty the trash cans, I deserve to be treated with dignity. Every person who walks into this building deserves that." A young woman from the marketing department started clapping slowly. Soon, other employees joined in, creating a wave of applause that filled the lobby. Robert looked around at his colleagues, realizing that he had lost not just his job, but the respect of everyone he worked with. Mike Rodriguez, the chief technology officer, stepped forward. "Robert, I've worked with you for 6 years. I've always respected your technical skills, but what I witnessed today is completely unacceptable. There's no excuse for treating another human being the way you treated Mr. Chen." "I know," Robert said, his voice cracking. "I know I messed up. I was just trying to protect the company. I thought he was trying to waste our time or sell us something we didn't need." "And even if that had been true," Jennifer Walsh interjected, "would that justify the way you spoke to him? Would that excuse the assumptions you made about his background and qualifications?" Robert had no answer for that. David looked around at the employees who were still watching this unfold. "I want everyone here to understand something important. This isn't just about Robert. This is about all of us. How many times have we made assumptions about people based on how they look or dress? How many times have we decided someone doesn't belong somewhere before we even know who they are?" He paused to let that sink in before continuing. "I've been on both sides of this equation. I've been the person making assumptions, and I've been the person having assumptions made about me. It's a human tendency, but it's one we have to fight against, especially in a workplace." Patricia nodded in agreement. "Mr. Chen is absolutely right. This incident has shown us that we have work to do as a company. We need to examine our culture and make sure this kind of behavior doesn't happen again." Robert finally spoke up, his voice desperate. "Please, I can't lose my job. I have a mortgage, kids in college. I've worked here for 8 years. This was just a mistake, a misunderstanding." David felt a pang of sympathy for the man despite everything that had happened. He knew that Robert's life was about to change dramatically, and not for the better. But he also knew that actions had consequences, and that some lines couldn't be uncrossed. "Robert," David said gently, "this wasn't just a mistake. This was a pattern of thinking that led to harmful behavior. You didn't just make one wrong assumption. You made multiple statements that showed deep-seated biases. You created a hostile environment for me, and probably for other people who've encountered you in the past." Jennifer Walsh stepped forward with her phone still in hand. "Robert, I'm going to need you to come with me to the HR office. We need to have a formal discussion about this incident and review your employment status." "But I apologized," Robert said desperately. "I admitted I was wrong. Doesn't that count for something?" Patricia shook her head. "Robert, our company has a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination and harassment. What happened here this morning crossed that line clearly and publicly. An apology, while appreciated, doesn't undo the harm that was done." David watched as the reality of the situation finally hit Robert fully. The engineer's face crumpled, and for a moment he looked like he might cry. Several of his co-workers looked away, uncomfortable with witnessing his breakdown. "I want everyone to learn from this," David announced to the crowd. "I don't take any pleasure in what's happening," to Robert. "But I also can't allow this kind of behavior to continue in a company I now own. Every person who works here, regardless of their position or background, deserves to be treated with respect." The crowd began to disperse slowly, people returning to their desks with plenty to talk about. Some lingered, clearly wanting to approach David but unsure if it was appropriate. Others walked away shaking their heads, probably thinking about their own interactions with Robert over the years. "Mr. Chen," Patricia said, "I think it's time we moved our meeting to the conference room. We have a lot to discuss about the future of this company." David nodded, taking one last look at Robert, who was now walking toward the HR office with Jennifer Walsh. In just a few minutes, Robert's 8-year career would officially be over, all because he couldn't see past his own assumptions and prejudices. 3 months had passed since that morning in the TechFlow Solutions lobby, and the company felt like a completely different place. David stood in the same spot where Robert had confronted him, but now the atmosphere was warm and welcoming. Employees greeted each other with genuine smiles, and visitors were treated with respect regardless of how they were dressed or what they looked like. The story of what happened that day had spread far beyond the walls of TechFlow Solutions. Videos of the confrontation had been shared thousands of times on social media, sparking conversations about workplace discrimination and the dangers of making assumptions about people. News outlets had picked up the story, and it had become a case study in business schools about the importance of inclusive leadership. But the real changes were happening inside the company itself. David had kept his word about using the incident as a learning opportunity. Within a week of taking over, he had instituted mandatory training sessions for all employees on unconscious bias and respectful workplace behavior. Unlike the boring compliance videos most companies used, these sessions were interactive discussions where people could share their own experiences and learn from each other. The training wasn't just about avoiding discrimination. David brought in speakers who talked about the business value of diverse perspectives, how assumptions could hurt innovation, and how treating everyone with respect created better teams. The sessions were sometimes uncomfortable, but they were always honest. Lisa, the young intern who had wanted to speak up during Robert's tirade but had been pulled away by her supervisor, was now one of David's strongest advocates in the company. She had approached him a few weeks after the incident and told him how guilty she felt for not intervening. "I knew what Robert was doing was wrong," she had said during one of their coffee meetings. "But I was scared to speak up. I'm just an intern and he was a senior engineer. I thought nobody would listen to me." David had smiled and shared his own stories about times when he had stayed silent in the face of unfair treatment. "The important thing," he told her, "is that we learn from these moments and do better next time. Now you know that your voice matters regardless of your title or experience level." Lisa had taken that lesson to heart. She was now leading an employee resource group focused on creating a more inclusive workplace culture. The group met monthly, and had already implemented several changes that made the office more welcoming for everyone. The receptionist, who had first assumed David was making a delivery, had also approached him with an apology. "I'm so embarrassed about how I treated you," she had said. "I made the same kinds of assumptions that Robert made, just not as loudly." David had appreciated her honesty and used it as another teaching moment. "We all make assumptions," he told her. "The key is recognizing when we do it and working to change our thinking. You didn't say anything hurtful and you were just trying to do your job. But maybe next time you'll ask fewer questions about what someone is wearing and more questions about how you can help them." The changes at TechFlow Solutions weren't just about sensitivity training and policy updates. David had also implemented practical changes that made the workplace more equitable. He had reviewed the company's hiring practices and found that they had been unconsciously favoring candidates from certain schools and backgrounds. Now the hiring process focused more on skills and potential, rather than where someone went to college or what their resume looked like on paper. The company's dress code had also been relaxed. David himself continued to wear jeans and polo shirts to work, showing employees that competence and professionalism weren't measured by how expensive your suit was. Some of the older executives had initially resisted this change, but they quickly saw that productivity actually improved when people were comfortable. As for Robert, his story had become a cautionary tale throughout the tech industry. Word of his behavior had spread quickly through professional networks, making it almost impossible for him to find another position at a reputable company. David had heard through mutual contacts that Robert was struggling financially and emotionally with the consequences of his actions. Initially, David had felt bad about Robert's situation. Despite everything that had happened, he didn't enjoy seeing someone's life fall apart. But Patricia and the HR team had reminded him that Robert's problems were the result of his own choices, not David's response to them. "You didn't create this situation," Patricia had told him during one of their weekly meetings. "Robert did. And honestly, based on what we discovered after he left, this wasn't his first incident of inappropriate behavior. We had complaints about him before, but people were afraid to come forward because he was considered technically indispensable." That revelation had been particularly troubling for David. It meant that Robert's behavior toward him wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a pattern that the company had failed to address. It reinforced his belief that the changes they were making were necessary and long overdue. The investigation into Robert's past behavior had uncovered several instances where he had made inappropriate comments to colleagues, particularly women and people of color. Some employees had complained informally to their supervisors, but nothing had been done because Robert was seen as too valuable to lose. "That's exactly the kind of thinking we need to change," David had told the executive team. "Nobody is so talented that they get a free pass to make other people uncomfortable or unwelcome. Skills can be taught, but character is much harder to change." 6 months after the incident, TechFlow Solutions was performing better than ever. Employee satisfaction scores had improved dramatically, and the company was attracting top talent from competitors who wanted to work in a more inclusive environment. Several major clients had specifically mentioned the positive workplace culture as a factor in choosing to do business with TechFlow. David often thought about the lessons he had learned from that morning in the lobby. The experience had reminded him that leadership wasn't just about making good business decisions or managing budgets. It was about creating an environment where everyone could do their best work without fear of being judged or discriminated against. Had also learned the importance of speaking up when witnessing unfair treatment. During a company all-hands meeting, he had shared his own regrets about times in his career when he had stayed silent in the face of discrimination. "I've been in situations where I saw someone being treated unfairly, and I didn't say anything, because it wasn't happening to me," he told the assembled employees. "I told myself it wasn't my place to get involved, or that someone else would speak up. But silence in the face of injustice is a form of complicity. We all have a responsibility to stand up for each other." The message had resonated with employees throughout the company. Several people had come forward to share their own stories of discrimination or unfair treatment, and the company had been able to address issues that might otherwise have festered in silence. As David stood in the lobby that day, watching employees from different backgrounds collaborate and laugh together, he felt proud of the progress they had made. The company was more successful, more innovative, and more humane than it had been before. But he also knew that the work wasn't finished. Creating an inclusive workplace was an ongoing process, not a one-time fix. There would always be new challenges and opportunities to do better. The incident with Robert had been painful for everyone involved, but it had also been a catalyst for positive change. Sometimes, David reflected, the most important lessons come from the most uncomfortable moments. The key is being willing to learn from them and use them to build something better. And that, he believed, was exactly what they had done.